Cleaner answers call in Japanese in front of Millionaire boss. The next day, Mrs. Margaret Wong, held the office phone with trembling hands, still wearing her yellow cleaning gloves. On the other end of the line, an urgent voice spoke rapidly in Japanese, and she responded fluently, unaware that Dr. Richard Thompson, CEO of Thompson Engineering, had stopped behind her, dumbfounded. The 52-year-old woman had worked as a cleaner in that high-end commercial building in downtown New York City for 3 years. Every day she arrived at 5 in the morning, cleaned the offices before the executives arrived, and disappeared through the halls like an invisible shadow. No one knew that beneath that worn navy blue uniform was an engineer who had graduated from Tokyo University. Hai, wakarimashita. Ashita no kaigi wa juji kara desu ne, Margaret said into the phone, confirming meeting details. Please inform Mr. Wong. Richard Thompson couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was the same woman he barely greeted in the halls, to whom he only gave sharp orders when he found dirt in his office. The same man who, just the week before, had complained to the cleaning supervisor that these people couldn't understand complex instructions. Margaret hung up the phone and turned around, meeting her boss's stunned gaze. The phone had rung while she was cleaning the conference room, and with no one around, she had answered automatically. It was an international call from the company's Japanese branch, urgently seeking Dr. Richard to confirm crucial details of a multi-million-dollar contract. You speak Japanese?" Richard stammered, still processing what he had witnessed. Margaret lowered her eyes, gripping the cleaning cloth tightly. She knew she had made a mistake. After years of hiding her past, a moment of carelessness could cost her the job that, humble as it was, supported her family. "I'm sorry, Doctor. The phone kept ringing, and she began, but Richard interrupted. No. What did they want? What did they say about the contract with Takeda Corporation?" Margaret hesitated. Revealing she understood the technical details of the conversation would mean admitting she knew far more than she let on. But lying now would be worse. They confirmed the meeting for tomorrow at 10 o'clock Tokyo time. They mentioned a clause in the contract about technical specifications that needs revising. Something about the material resistance for the bridge. Richard took a step back, as if punched. Takeda Corporation was his biggest international client, a $50 million contract to build a bridge in Japan, and his cleaner not only spoke fluent Japanese, but also understood engineering terms. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. "So, who are you?" Richard asked, his voice a mix of surprise and something Margaret couldn't identify. Anger? Curiosity? Fear? Margaret took a deep breath. After 3 years living in the shadows, maybe it was time to face her past. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain to this powerful man, who saw her only as an invisible employee, that she had once designed bridges and buildings? How could she say that life sometimes takes us down paths we never imagined? "I'm just Margaret, Doctor. The cleaner from the 3rd floor," she finally replied, hoping he'd dismiss her. But Richard didn't move. His eyes scanned her face, as if seeing her for the first time. The wrinkles around her eyes, the calloused hands from hard work, the hunched posture of someone who'd spent years being ignored. And yet, there was something in her gaze, an intelligence, a dignity he'd never noticed before. "I need you to come with me to my office," he ordered, already turning to leave. "Now." Margaret felt her stomach drop. She was being fired. She was sure of it. She thought of her 2 grandchildren, Nathan and Amy, who depended on her ever since her daughter Jennifer had lost her job. She thought of the overdue rent, the piled-up electricity bills, the blood pressure medication she needed to buy. In the CEO's luxurious office, with its panoramic view of the city, Richard pointed to a chair. Margaret sat on the edge, uncomfortable in a space she usually cleaned but never occupied. "I'll be direct," Richard began, settling behind his massive mahogany desk. "I need someone who speaks Japanese fluently for a crucial meeting tomorrow. My interpreter is sick and you seem capable." Margaret almost laughed at the irony. Capable? If only he knew she had once been a project manager at Nakano Corporation, one of Japan's largest construction firms. If only he knew she had returned to the United States to care for her sick mother and never managed to re-enter her field. "I don't think that's appropriate, Doctor," she replied carefully. "I'm just a cleaner." Richard leaned forward, his face a mask of irritation. "I don't care what you are, you need this job, don't you? Then you'll do as I say." The words cut Margaret like blades. It was always like this. To men like Richard Thompson, people like her were just tools, objects to be used as needed. But she needed this job, she had no choice. "Yes, sir," she murmured. "Good, tomorrow at 8 in the morning, dress appropriately," he said, gesturing vaguely at her uniform. "I can't introduce a cleaner to the Japanese." Margaret left the room with a heavy heart. Appropriately. As if clothes could change who she was, what she had lived through, what she had lost. But something else nagged at her. Why was Richard so desperate? A man with his resources surely had other options. That night, in her small apartment in Queens, Margaret examined the only suit she still kept from her past life, a dark grey set, well preserved despite the years, tucked away in the back of her closet like a relic from a distant past. Her grandchildren played in the living room, oblivious to their grandmother's turmoil. "Grandma, why are you crying?" asked 7-year-old Amy, hugging her legs. Margaret quickly wiped her tears. How could she explain to a child that sometimes life forces us to hide who we really are, that pride has a price, and sometimes that price is too high? "It's nothing, sweetheart. Grandma's just tired," she lied, stroking her granddaughter's dark hair. Jennifer came home late that night, exhausted from another unsuccessful day of job hunting. At 32, a single mother of 2, she relied entirely on her mother's cleaning salary. When Margaret told her about the next day, Jennifer grew worried. "Mom, are you sure about this? What if they find out about the past?" Margaret had kept much from her own daughter. Jennifer knew her mother had worked in Japan, but not the extent of her career or the real reason she'd returned to the United States. "They won't find out anything," Margaret assured her. "It's just a translation. I go in, translate, leave. Simple as that." But nothing in Margaret Wong's life had ever been simple, and the next day would prove that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to resurface. The following morning, Margaret arrived at the office wearing her old suit. The security guards barely recognized her, and she had to show her cleaning staff badge 3 times before being allowed upstairs. In the hallways, other employees looked at her curiously, whispering among themselves. Richard was waiting impatiently in his office, checking his watch every minute. When she entered, he examined her from head to toe, seemingly satisfied with her appearance. "Better," he murmured. "The Japanese are very formal. We can't afford any room for—" "Embarrassment?" Margaret finished, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Richard stared at her, surprised by her tone. It was the first time in 3 years she had shown any emotion beyond subservience. "Exactly," he replied coldly. "Let's go to the conference room. They'll call in 15 minutes. The conference room was an intimidating space, with a massive glass table and leather chairs that cost more than Margaret made in a year. Richard pointed to a seat beside him, facing the screen where the Japanese team would appear. "You'll translate exactly what they say," he instructed, "word for word. No interpretations or summaries. Understood?" Margaret nodded, but inside a small flame of rebellion began to flicker, word for word. As if translation were just swapping words, without considering context, culture, or nuance. But she would stay quiet, for now. The screen came to life, showing 5 Japanese executives in a flawless meeting room. Margaret immediately recognized the man at the center, Kenji Takeda, CEO of Takeda Corporation. They had worked together 20 years ago when she was still Lily Wong, one of Japan's most promising engineers. Margaret's heart raced. Would he recognize her? 2 decades had passed. She had aged, changed her name, built a new life. But the eyes never changed completely. "Ohayo gozaimasu, Thompson-san," Takeda greeted with a slight bow. Richard looked at Margaret expectantly, and she translated mechanically. The meeting continued with technical discussions about the bridge project. Margaret translated precisely, but her mind was in turmoil. At any moment, Takeda might recognize her. Then the disaster began. One of the Japanese engineers raised a critical issue with the bridge's structural design. The specifications sent by Thompson Engineering contained a calculation error that could compromise the entire structure. In rapid technical Japanese, they debated the severity of the situation. Margaret translated faithfully, watching Richard's face pale with every word. The mistake was serious, but very serious. It could cost not just the contract, but open them up to lawsuits for professional negligence. "This is impossible," Richard exploded. "My engineers checked these calculations dozens of times." Margaret translated his response, but the Japanese team didn't seem convinced. Then Takeda asked the question that changed everything. "Thompson-san, who is the woman beside you?" She translates with impressive technical precision. Richard hesitated. How could he explain that his interpreter was actually the building's cleaning lady? "She's a temporary consultant," he lied. Takeda narrowed his eyes, studying Margaret through the screen. She kept her face impassive, professional, praying he wouldn't recognize her. "Interesting," Takeda murmured in Japanese. "Ask her if she could review the calculations. Something tells me she'd understand." Margaret translated the first part, but omitted the second. Richard, now sweating, agreed to send the calculations for the Japanese team's review. The meeting ended with a promise to respond within 48 hours. When the screen went dark, Richard collapsed into his chair, dragging his hands down his face. "I'm ruined," he muttered. "If we lose this contract, the company goes under. 300 jobs lost. My reputation destroyed." Margaret remained silent, wrestling with conflicting feelings. Part of her felt a dark satisfaction seeing that arrogant man in despair. But another part, the part that had been a leader, that had been responsible for teams and projects, understood the weight of that responsibility. I can try to help," she heard herself saying. Richard raised his head, staring at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You? How could a janitor help with structural engineering calculations?" And there it was, the contempt, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that someone like her could offer nothing beyond manual labor. Margaret felt decades of humiliation and frustration bubbling inside her. "Forget it," she said, standing up. "I have to get back to work. The third floor doesn't clean itself." "Wait." Richard stood up too, desperate. "If you can help in any way, please, please." 2 words Margaret had never heard from him. She stopped at the door without turning around. "The mistake is in section 7B of the load calculations," she said calmly. The team didn't consider the thermal expansion coefficient of steel in extreme climates. In the Japanese winter, with temperature variations, the structure as designed would create fatal stresses at the weld points. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret could hear Richard's heavy breathing behind her. How do you know this?" His voice was barely a whisper. Margaret finally turned, looking him straight in the eye. "Because I designed 3 of the largest bridges in Tokyo, Dr. Thompson. Because I was head of the structural engineering department at Nakano Corporation for 10 years. Because before being your invisible janitor, I was someone." Richard had to lean on the table. The world seemed to have turned upside down. His janitor, the woman he treated as an object, barely considering human, was an engineer of international caliber. But why? How? He couldn't form complete sentences. Margaret sighed. The truth, kept for so long, weighed on her chest like lead. "Life, Dr. Thompson. Life happens. Choices are made, priorities change. We can't always be who we were," she said, her voice heavy with ancient sadness. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have bathrooms to clean." "No," Richard practically shouted. "Please sit down. I need to understand. I need your help." And so, for the first time in 3 years, Margaret Wong sat as an equal in that room. Not as a servant, but as the professional she once was. Richard served coffee with trembling hands. The power dynamic between them completely shifted. "Please," he repeated, "tell me your story. And then help me save my company." Margaret held the coffee cup, the steam rising in spirals. That seemed to carry memories of the past. Where to begin? How to condense a lifetime of achievements and losses into words that made sense? "My real name is Lily Wong," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I was born in New York City, the daughter of Japanese immigrants. At 18, I won a scholarship to study engineering in Tokyo. It was my father's dream to see his daughter graduate from a prestigious university." Richard listened in silence, his face a mask of shock and something that looked like shame. "I graduated with honors. I was hired by Nakano Corporation, one of Japan's largest construction firms. In 15 years, I rose from junior engineer to department head. I designed bridges, skyscrapers, subway stations." She paused, a melancholic smile on her lips. "I was respected. I had a career, a future." "What happened?" Richard asked gently. Margaret closed her eyes, painful, memories returning like waves. "My mother got sick, early Alzheimer's. My father had passed years before, and she had no one else in the United States. I had to choose my career or my mother." She opened her eyes, staring at Richard. "I chose my mother. I would always choose my mother." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. "I returned to the United States in 2005. I took care of her for 8 years, until the end. When I tried to re-enter the job market, I found out that a 45-year-old woman with a nearly decade-long gap in her resume isn't welcome anywhere. My Japanese degrees weren't fully recognized here. My experience was considered outdated." Richard lowered his gaze, ashamed. How many resumes had he dismissed for the same reasons? "So I took whatever came my way," Margaret continued. "A janitor. At least it was honest work. My daughter Jennifer had just had Amy. The father of the children had disappeared and she needed help. Pride is a luxury mothers and grandmothers can't afford. But your knowledge, your experience..." Richard seemed genuinely perplexed. "They don't feed children, Dr. Thompson," Margaret replied with brutal simplicity. "Degrees don't pay rent when no one wants to hire you." Richard stood up, walking to the window. The city stretched out below, millions of invisible stories like Margaret's unfolding at that very moment. "I'm an idiot," he finally said. "A complete, arrogant idiot." Margaret didn't disagree, there was no need. "About the mistake in the project," she said, changing the subject. "I can fix it, but I'll need access to the full files. And..." she hesitated. "What?" "Anything." Richard turned, hopeful. "I want this kept between us. I don't want my name involved. I still need my janitor job," she said firmly. Richard looked shocked. "But I can offer you an engineering position with your experience." "With my age, you mean?" Margaret smiled bitterly. "For how long? Until the next cost-cutting round? Until someone younger and cheaper comes along? No, thank you. I'd rather have the security of a humble but stable job." It was a devastating thought, but true. Richard sat back down, looking smaller, more human than Margaret had ever seen him. "All right," he agreed, "but at least let me pay you properly for your consulting work." "An extra would be welcome," Margaret admitted. "Nathan needs braces, and the cleaning job's insurance doesn't cover it." They spent the rest of the day working. Margaret analyzed the calculations, identifying not just the main error but several other optimizations that could save millions on the project. Richard watched in awe as she filled whiteboards with complex equations, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had mastered the subject completely. "It's like riding a bike," she remarked at one point, noticing his gaze. "Real knowledge never disappears. It just lies dormant." By 6 in the evening, when the office was nearly empty, they had resolved all the technical issues. Margaret prepared a detailed report, careful to make it seem as if Richard's team had done the work. "This will save the contract," Richard said, holding the papers as if they were gold. "It'll save the company. I don't know how to thank you." Margaret was already gathering her cleaning supplies, slipping back into the role the world expected of her. "Just treat me with respect from now on," she said simply. "Good morning and good night. Please and thank you. That's all any human being deserves." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Margaret came home later than usual. Jennifer waited for her, worried, the children already asleep. "Mom, what happened? Why were you so late?" Margaret sank heavily onto the worn-out couch, pulling off her aching shoes. "Just a long day, dear, nothing major." But Jennifer knew her mother. There was something different in her eyes, a light she hadn't seen in years. "Mom," she began, but Margaret interrupted her. "I'm going to take a shower. We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" Under the warm water, Margaret finally let the tears fall. Tears of relief, of sadness, of pent-up anger. For a few hours, she had been Lily again. She had used her brain, her knowledge, her real skills, and now she had to go back to being invisible. The phone rang as she stepped out of the shower. The number was unknown, international. With a racing heart, she answered. "Lily?" The voice on the other end spoke in Japanese. "It's really you, isn't it? I recognized you today during the video conference. It was Kenji Takeda." Margaret closed her eyes, leaning against the wall. "I think you're mistaken, Mr. Takeda. My name is Margaret." "Lily, please. I'd recognize your eyes anywhere, and the way you translated, only someone with deep technical knowledge could have been so precise." His voice was gentle, nostalgic. "What happened to you? I searched for years. You just vanished." Margaret felt the weight of 2 decades crashing down on her shoulders. "Life happened, Kenji. I had to make choices. But why didn't you reach out? We could have helped. You were our best engineer. Lily, I still miss you on the team." The words were like knives in Margaret's heart. What could have been? What never would be? "It was another time, another life," she replied, her voice choked. "Please, Kenji, don't tell anyone. I have a life here now. Simple, but it's mine." There was a long silence on the other end. "If that's what you want." "But Lily, if you ever want to come back, the doors will always be open. The world needs minds like yours." After hanging up, Margaret cried as she hadn't in years. She cried for the ambitious young woman she had been, for the dreams she'd abandoned, for the impossible choices life forces us to make. Jennifer found her like that, curled up in the corner of the room, and hugged her without asking questions. "It's okay, Mom. I'm here. We're here." In the days that followed, life seemed to return to normal. Margaret went back to her cleaning routine. Richard started greeting her politely in the hallways, and the contract with the Takeda Corporation was saved. But something fundamental had changed. Richard began to truly see the people around him, the receptionist who studied law at night, the security guard who wrote poetry in his free time, the doorman who spoke 4 languages. How many extraordinary stories were hidden behind uniforms and name tags. A week after the incident, Richard called Margaret into a meeting. She went reluctantly, afraid he'd changed his mind about keeping her secret. "I have a proposal," he said as soon as she entered. "Not as an engineer, I know you don't want that. But as an educational consultant." Margaret raised an eyebrow, curious. "I want to create a training program for employees," Richard explained. "So many have wasted talents and knowledge. I want to give real opportunities, and I need someone who understands both sides, who's lived it." "So you want me to coordinate this?" Margaret was genuinely surprised. "Who better? You know the barriers, the prejudices, the real struggles, and you have the technical background to structure a serious program." Richard seemed excited by the idea. "You could keep your current job and do this part-time, with proper compensation, of course." Margaret considered the offer. It was a chance to help others in the same situation, to create opportunities she herself had never had. "And your board? Will they accept a janitor coordinating an educational program?" Richard smiled, a different smile than usual, more human. "I'll introduce you as M. Wong, an educational consultant with international experience," which is absolutely true. For the first time in years, Margaret felt something like hope. It wasn't a return to engineering, but it was a chance to use her skills for something meaningful. "I'll think about it," she said, but Richard could see in her eyes that the answer would be yes. As she left the room, Margaret ran into other cleaning staff in the hallway. Mrs. Johnson, the 65-year-old woman who cleaned the second floor. Mr. Wilson in charge of the restrooms. Ashley, the young single mother who worked the night shift. "Everything okay, Margaret?" Mrs. Johnson asked, concerned. The doctor isn't giving you trouble, is he? No, Margaret replied, a small smile on her lips. I think things might be changing around here. That night, when she got home, Margaret found Jennifer helping Nathan with his math homework. The 10-year-old boy was struggling with fractions, frustrated. "Grandma," he exclaimed when he saw her. "You're good at math, right? Mum said you studied a lot." Margaret sat beside her grandson, looking at the problem. "Let's see what we have here," she said, picking up the pencil. As she explained fractions using practical examples from the kitchen, Margaret noticed Amy watching intently. "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be smart like you," the little girl said. "You're already smart, sweetheart," Margaret replied, kissing her forehead, "and you'll be whatever you want to be. The world is changing. It'll be different for you." Jennifer watched her mother with the kids, noticing the subtle shift in her posture. There was a different energy, a spark she hadn't seen in a long time. "Mom, what really happened this week?" she asked once. The children were asleep. Margaret hesitated, then told her everything. The phone call in Japanese, the revelation to Richard, Takeda's proposal, the new project. Jennifer listened silently, her eyes filling with tears. "Why didn't you ever tell me about who you really were?" "Because I was afraid you'd feel guilty," Margaret admitted. "I came back because of your grandmother, but I stayed for you and the kids, and I've never, not for a second, regretted it." Jennifer hugged her mother tightly. "You're the most amazing woman I know, and you deserve this second chance." The next day, Margaret officially accepted Richard's proposal. The program would launch quietly, starting with research to identify hidden talents among the staff. Margaret insisted on including not just direct employees, but also contractors, cleaning, security, kitchen staff. The first challenge came from where she least expected it, resistance from the employees themselves. Many, like her, had learned to stay invisible, to avoid drawing attention. The fear of exposure, of judgment, of false hope was palpable. "Why now?" Mr. Wilson asked during one of the first meetings. "I've worked here 15 years. Why do they suddenly care if I have other talents?" Margaret understood the distrust. How many corporate initiatives started with big promises and ended in nothing? "Because someone finally opened their eyes," she answered honestly, "and because we have a chance to do things differently. But it'll only work if you trust us." "I know it's hard." "You're one of us, Margaret," Mrs. Johnson said. "If you say it's real, we believe you." Slowly, the stories began to emerge. Mr. Wilson had been an accountant before a financial crisis destroyed the small firm where he worked. Mrs. Johnson had been a Portuguese teacher, forced into early retirement by education budget cuts. Ashley studied programming online in the early mornings, dreaming of a career in tech. Richard followed the progress with genuine interest. The change in him was remarkable, not just in how he treated the staff, but in his entire approach to business. "You know what amazes me the most?" he remarked during an evaluation meeting. "The amount of wasted potential. How many companies must be in the same situation, overlooking human treasures due to prejudice or blindness?" Margaret nodded, but kept to herself the thought that he had been part of the problem for years. Real change takes time, and at least he was trying. The program began with basic English and math classes for those who needed them, evolving into technical and vocational courses. Margaret coordinated everything with the efficiency of someone who had managed large projects before, but with the sensitivity of someone who understood the daily struggles of those people. A month after the program started, the first major test came. The company urgently needed a junior programmer, and HR was struggling to find candidates. Richard remembered Ashley and suggested they give her a test. "But she doesn't have a complete education," argued the HR manager. "Just some online courses." "Give her the technical test," Richard insisted. "If she fails, end of discussion, but if she passes—" Ashley passed, with one of the highest scores the department had ever seen. The young single mother who cleaned offices at night became a junior programmer with a salary 3 times higher and room for growth. The news spread like wildfire. Suddenly, Margaret's program had lines of interested applicants. Employees who had hidden their qualifications for years began to come forward. But not everything was smooth sailing. Some company executives resisted the idea, seeing it as disruptive and potentially risky. If we start promoting janitors and security guards, what message does that send to the market? Questioned the CFO during a board meeting. The message? That we value talent over prejudice, Richard replied firmly. That we're innovative not just in engineering but in people management. Margaret, who was presenting the program's preliminary results, remained professional, but inside she was seething. Janitors and security guards, as if they were subhuman categories, not people with stories, dreams, and abilities. With all due respect, she interjected, her voice controlled but firm, the company saved $2 million on the Takeda project thanks to the work of a janitor. Maybe we should rethink our biases about who can or can't add value. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Everyone knew the story, though the details were confidential. Richard had been transparent about the mistake that had nearly cost the company its biggest contract and how it had been resolved. Besides, Margaret continued, Ashley, our former cleaning staff member, has already identified and fixed 3 critical bugs in the company's system in her first month as a programmer. Bugs the previous team hadn't detected in 2 years. The CFO backed down, but Margaret could see the battle wasn't won. There were powerful conservative forces in the company, people who benefited from the status quo and didn't want change. That night, Margaret received an unexpected call. It was Takeda again. Lily, I heard about the program you're developing at Thompson Engineering, he said in Japanese. It's admirable. Exactly the kind of social innovation the world needs. How did you hear about it? Margaret was surprised. Richard mentioned it in our last conversation. He's very proud of the project, and of you, though he doesn't know I'm aware of your true identity. Takeda paused. Lily, I have a proposal. The Takeda Corporation wants to expand into the United States. We need someone who understands both cultures, who can build bridges, not just physical ones but human ones. Margaret felt her heart race. It was a tempting offer, a chance to return to engineering through the front door. Kenji, You don't have to answer now, he interrupted gently. Think about it. We'll talk when I'm in the United States next month, but know the offer is serious. Senior executive salary, full benefits, and most importantly, respect for who you are and always have been. After hanging up, Margaret stood gazing out the window of her small apartment. The city lights shimmered in the distance, each one representing a life, a story. At 52, when she thought her time had passed, the world suddenly offered possibilities she had buried alongside her mother. Jennifer found her like this, lost in thought. Mom, are you okay? Margaret told her about the offer from Takeda Corporation. Jennifer listened intently, her face a mix of pride and worry. So what do you want to do? I don't know, Margaret admitted. Part of me wants to accept, to prove I still can, that I'm still the engineer I once was, but another part built something here, Jennifer finished. The program at Thompson is changing lives. You're changing lives. It was true. In just 2 months, 5 employees had been promoted to better positions. 15 more were in training. The program was being studied by other companies as a model for inclusion and talent development. And there's Richard, Jennifer added with a small smile. Margaret looked at her daughter, surprised. What about him? Mom, please, you two work together almost every day. He clearly respects and admires you. And you're different. When you talk about him, Jennifer, Margaret protested but felt her face grow warm. It's strictly a professional relationship. If you say so, Jennifer laughed. But Mom, you deserve to be happy. In every part of life, not just professionally. In the days that followed, Margaret threw herself even deeper into work, trying not to think about Takeda's offer or Jennifer's hints about Richard. But life has a way of forcing us to face what we try to avoid. It was during a routine visit to the engineering floor that Margaret's past unexpectedly resurfaced. She was reviewing resumes of employees interested in technical training when she overheard a heated argument in the design room. That's impossible. The structure wouldn't hold, a young engineer shouted. Margaret quietly approached. On the computer screen, she saw plans for a new bridge, part of an urban expansion project. Her trained eye immediately spotted the problem, the same kind of mistake she'd caught in the Takeda project. Without thinking, She stepped into the room. "Excuse me, but if you move the central support point 12 feet north, the load distribution—" "Would balance," she said, pointing to the screen. The 5 engineers in the room turned to stare at her. The youngest one, who had shouted, laughed dismissively. "Ma'am, I don't know if you realize, but this is advanced engineering, not floor cleaning." The insult hit Margaret like a slap. For a moment she considered leaving, retreating to safe invisibility. But something inside her rebelled. Enough hiding. "Young man, I was calculating structural loads when you were still in diapers," she replied calmly, stepping toward the whiteboard. "May I?" Without waiting for an answer, she began writing equations. Her hands moved with the confidence of decades of experience, filling the board with complex calculations. The engineers watched in growing silence, their disdain giving way to astonishment. "Here's your problem," she said, circling a variable. "You forgot to account for torsion caused by crosswinds. On paper it seems minor, but over 20 years, it would create fatal cracks." But who are you?" the young engineer stammered. Before Margaret could answer, Richard entered the room, alerted by the commotion. "This is Margaret Wong," he said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Former head of structural engineering at Nakano Corporation, Tokyo. Designer of the Miyazaki, Hokkaido and Osaka bridges, and the current coordinator of our talent development program." The silence in the room was absolute. The young engineer who had insulted her looked like he was about to faint. "She also," Richard continued, his eyes fixed on the young man, "saved the Takeda contract with her expertise, so I suggest you show the respect she deserves." Margaret felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort. She didn't want to be defended. She wanted to be respected on her own merit. "Thank you, Dr. Thompson, but I can speak for myself," she said, turning to the engineers. "Yes, I was everything he just said. And yes, today I'm officially a cleaning staff member. Life takes interesting turns. But knowledge is knowledge, no matter who carries it or what uniform they wear." She walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, and double-check the specified steel alloy. For the US climate, you'll need something with higher corrosion resistance. The current specification is for temperate weather." She left the room, leaving 5 stunned engineers and a CEO with an admiring smile on his face. The news spread through the company like wildfire. The cleaning lady, who was an engineer, the woman who had saved the multi-million-dollar contract. Speculations ran wild, some respectful, others less so. Margaret tried to maintain her normal routine, but it was impossible. Employees who had once ignored her now sought her out for advice, some with genuine interest, others out of morbid curiosity. It was Mrs. Johnson who put things into perspective during lunch in the employee break room. "You know what the problem is, Margaret?" the older woman said, stirring her coffee. "You've messed up the natural order of things. People like their neat little boxes. Cleaning staff are cleaning staff. Engineers are engineers. When someone doesn't fit in a box, it makes them uncomfortable." "I didn't ask to be a symbol of anything," Margaret sighed. "I just wanted to do my job in peace." "But you are a symbol, dear," Mrs. Johnson insisted, "for all of us. You show we're more than our uniforms, and that scares the people who benefit from keeping us small." That afternoon, Margaret was called back into Richard's office. She went with apprehension, fearing her exposure had caused problems. "Please sit," he said, looking unusually nervous. "I need to talk to you about several things." Margaret sat, noticing Richard struggling for words. "First, I apologize for what happened earlier in engineering. I shouldn't have shared your story like that." "You were defending me," she acknowledged. "I appreciate the intention." "Second," he continued, "I got an interesting call from the state government. They heard about our program and want to replicate it in public companies. They want you as lead consultant." Margaret raised her eyebrows. Opportunities seemed to multiply exponentially. "And third," Richard stood pacing nervously, "I need to be honest about something. These months working with you have changed my perspective on many things, not just business or people management, but life itself." He turned his back to her, staring out the window. "Margaret, I've developed feelings for you that go beyond professional. I know it's inappropriate. I know it complicates everything. but I had to say it. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Margaret's heart raced, Jennifer's words echoing in her mind. She had felt it too, a connection beyond their shared work. But there were so many barriers. "Richard," she began carefully, "you're a good man going through an important transformation, but you need to be sure you're not mistaking admiration or gratitude for something else." He turned to face her. "I'm 47, Margaret. I was married for 15 years, divorced for 5. I know my own feelings. What I feel for you is real. I'm 52 years old," she reminded him. "I'm a grandmother. I'm your cleaning lady." "You're one of the most extraordinary women I've ever met," he replied intensely. "Age is just a number, and as for being an employee, well, we have several offers on the table that could change that, don't we?" Margaret stood up, needing distance to think clearly. "Richard, my life is complicated. I have responsibilities, a family that depends on me, and I just received a job offer in Japan that—" "In Japan?" He seemed struck. "Are you considering it?" "I'm considering all my options," she answered honestly. "For the first time in years I have choices. It's overwhelming." Richard stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "I understand. I don't want to pressure you. But Margaret, at least think about the possibility of including me in your future, whatever it may be." Margaret looked at the man who for months had been just another arrogant executive, but now seemed vulnerable, human, transformed. Life really took unexpected turns. "I need time," she finally said, "to process everything. The job offers, the program here, and this." "All the time you need," Richard nodded. "Just promise you won't disappear in the middle of the night like you did in Japan 20 years ago." The reference to her past caught her off guard. How did he know? "Takeda told me," Richard explained, reading her expression. "He called to ask about you, about the program. We ended up talking for a while. He really cares about you." Margaret felt exposed, as if the carefully built walls around her life were crumbling. "I have to go," she said, heading for the door. "The kids are waiting for me for dinner." "Margaret," Richard called as she reached the door, "whatever you decide about everything, know that you've changed my life, for the better. I'll always be grateful for that." She left without answering, emotions swirling inside her like a storm. At home, she found a scene that made her pause. In the doorway, Jennifer, Nathan, and Amy were at the kitchen table, bent over papers and books. Her daughter was helping the kids with their homework, patience and warmth evident in every gesture. "Grandma," Amy exclaimed when she saw her, "Mom's teaching us about Japan. Did you know they have robots that take care of people there?" Margaret smiled, stepping inside and kissing each of them. "I did, sweetheart. It's a fascinating country." "Mum, are you okay?" Jennifer asked, noticing something different in her expression. "You seem upset." "Just tired," Margaret deflected. "It's been a long day." Later, after the kids were asleep, mother and daughter sat on the small apartment balcony sipping tea. "Now tell me the truth," Jennifer urged. "What happened?" Margaret told her everything. The exposure of her identity at the company, the government's offer, Richard's confession. Jennifer listened silently, her eyes widening gradually. "My goodness," she murmured when Margaret finished. "When it rains, it pours. What do I do, Jennifer?" Margaret rarely asked her daughter for advice, but she felt lost. There are so many changes, so many possibilities. Jennifer took her mother's hands in hers. "Mum, you've spent the last 20 years living for others. For Grandma, for me, for the kids. You never complained, never regretted it, at least not out loud. But now you have the chance to choose something for yourself. But what about you? If I accept the offer in Japan—" "We'll be fine," Jennifer interrupted firmly. "I found a job finally. Administrative assistant, nothing extraordinary, but it's a start. And the kids, they want to see their grandma happy and fulfilled." Margaret looked at her daughter with pride. When had the insecure girl she'd raised become this strong woman? "And Richard?" Jennifer asked with a small smile. "How do you feel about him?" Margaret sighed. "I don't know. There's something there. I can't deny it, but it's so complicated. Love always is, Jennifer mused. The question is the complication worth it? It was a good question. Margaret spent the night wide awake thinking about it, thinking about all the questions life had placed in her lap. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Margaret arrived at work determined to maintain normalcy. But she found the building in an uproar. Journalists waited at the entrance, cameras and microphones at the ready. "What's going on?" she asked Mr. Wilson, who was watching the scene from the security booth. "Looks like the story about the program leaked to the press," he replied. "They're calling it the corporate revolution or something like that. They want to talk to the genius janitor behind it all." Margaret felt her blood run cold. The last thing she wanted was media exposure. "Is there another way in?" "Through the back, by the parking lot," Mr. Wilson pointed out. "But Margaret, sooner or later they'll find you." She managed to enter the building, avoiding the journalists, but inside, the atmosphere was just as chaotic. Employees whispered in the hallways, and she could feel eyes following her. Richard intercepted her at the elevator. "Margaret, we need to talk. The situation is out of control." In his office, he showed her the online articles already circulating. "Janitor with hidden PhD revolutionizes company. From mop to boardroom, the inspiring story of Margaret Wong." The sensational headlines made Margaret shudder. "How did they find out?" she asked. "Someone leaked it. We're investigating," Richard said, sounding furious. "But right now, the important thing is how to handle this. The phone won't stop ringing. They want interviews, speeches, documentaries." "No," Margaret said firmly. "I don't want any of that. I just want to work in peace." "I understand, but Margaret, this could be an opportunity for the program to inspire change in other companies." She knew he was right, but the idea of becoming a public figure terrified her. She had spent so long in the shadows that the EI show sudden spotlight was blinding. "I need to think," she said, "and I need to protect my family from all this." "Of course, I'll do everything I can to contain the situation," Richard promised. "But Margaret, maybe it's time to stop hiding." His words stayed with her as she tried to go about her daily tasks. But working normally was impossible. Reporters kept trying to sneak into the building. Employees approached her constantly. Her personal phone, which rarely rang, wouldn't stop buzzing. Then Jennifer called with the news that would change everything. "Mom, you need to come home now." "What happened? Are the kids okay?" "They're fine, but there's someone here who wants to talk to you. Someone from Japan." Margaret's heart raced. Takeda had said he would come to the United States, but not this soon. "I'm on my way." She told Richard she had to leave and took a taxi, avoiding the company car that might be followed by reporters. During the ride, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. When she got home, she found not just Takeda but 2 other Japanese executives in her small living room. Jennifer had improvised some tea, and the children watched the foreign visitors curiously. "Lily," Takeda stood and bowed respectfully. "Forgive the unexpected visit, but the situation required urgency." Margaret returned the bow, Japanese protocol, coming back automatically. "Mr. Takeda, it's an honor, but please, let's speak privately," he requested. Jennifer took the children to their room, leaving them alone. The other executives remained silent out of respect as Takeda spoke. "Lily, I came in person because the offer I made is more urgent than I explained. We're not just opening a branch, but a full research and development center. We need someone to lead the entire operation." Margaret felt the weight of the proposal. This wasn't just a job, it was a top leadership position. "With all due respect, Mr. Takeda, I'm 52. I've been out of the workforce for decades. And you've proven that doesn't mean a thing," he interrupted. "What you accomplished at Thompson Engineering, the program you created, it shows vision, leadership, innovation. That's exactly what we need." One of the other executives, whom Margaret now recognized as the company's HR director, added, "We've prepared a complete package. Senior executive salary, benefits for your entire family, including education for your grandchildren in Japan or here, whichever you prefer. And most importantly, full autonomy to implement your ideas. It was a dream offer. Everything Margaret had lost was being handed back to her, and more. But I need time to decide, she said. This is a huge change. We understand, Takeda nodded. But we need an answer in a week. The project can't wait any longer. After the Japanese delegation left, Margaret sank heavily onto the couch. Jennifer returned with the children, who immediately bombarded her with questions. Grandma, those men talked funny, Nathan laughed. They're from Japan, sweetheart, Margaret explained. They speak Japanese. Are you going to work with them? Grandma, asked Amy, always perceptive. I saw they brought important papers. Margaret looked at her family, Jennifer, who had struggled so hard to find her footing, Nathan and Amy, too young to fully understand but who deserved every opportunity in the world. Maybe, she finally replied. Grandma has some big decisions to make. That night, Margaret did something she hadn't done in years. She took out paper and pen and began listing the pros and cons of each option. The Japanese offer meant returning to the peak of her career, financial security, professional respect. But it also meant starting over, possibly being apart from her family, leaving behind the program she'd built. Staying meant continuing her work on the program, exploring her feelings for Richard, maintaining the family's stability. But it also meant accepting limitations, media scrutiny, and the barriers that still remained. Amid her thoughts, the phone. It was Richard. Margaret, sorry to call so late, but I had to know if you're all right. I heard you had visitors. She hesitated, then told him about Takeda's expanded offer. A long silence followed on the other end. It's an incredible opportunity, he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. You should take it. Richard. No, Margaret. Seriously, it would be selfish of me to ask you to stay when you have this chance. You deserve to be where your talents are fully recognized. Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes. Why did life insist on forcing impossible choices? I haven't decided anything yet, she said softly. But you should. And Margaret? Whatever you choose, what I said yesterday still stands. My feelings won't change. After hanging up, Margaret cried. She cried for life's complexities, for difficult choices, for the weight of having options after years without any. Jennifer found her like that, and wordlessly hugged her. Sometimes, a daughter's silent comfort is all a mother needs. The following days were a whirlwind. The media remained interested in the story, but Richard managed to keep reporters at bay with help from the legal department. The development program continued growing, with more companies interested in replicating the model. Margaret kept to her routine, but everyone could see she was torn. During a meeting with program participants, Mrs. Johnson confronted her. Margaret, dear, you look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. That's a bit how I feel, Margaret admitted. Can I give you some advice from an old woman? Mrs. Johnson didn't wait for a response. When I was at the crossroads between continuing to teach or taking care of my sick husband, someone told me, choose what will let you look in the mirror without regrets. It wasn't easy, but I never regretted choosing love. But it's not just about love, protested Margaret. It's about career, family, future. Everything in life is about love, dear. Mrs. Johnson smiled. Love for what we do, for who we are, for those by our side. The question is, what kind of love weighs more in your heart? Her friend's simple words touched Margaret deeply. That night she called a family meeting. Jennifer, Nathan and Amy sat around the table, their faces expectant. Family, Margaret began. I need to make an important decision, and you're all part of it. She explained the options, simplifying it for the children to understand. Going to Japan would mean a new life, an international school for them, endless opportunities. Staying would mean continuing their current life, but with Grandma more fulfilled professionally. Do you want to go to Japan, Grandma? Asked Amy. Part of me does, Margaret answered honestly, but part of me also wants to stay. What about Uncle Richard? Nathan surprised everyone with the question. He likes Grandma. I noticed. Jennifer laughed. Margaret blushed. Nathan, it's true, the boy insisted. He looks at Grandma the way Jason's dad looks at his mom, out of the mouths of babes. What do you all think? Margaret decided to ask directly. What would make me happiest? The children exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language siblings share. Grandma, Amy said solemnly, you always tell us to follow our hearts. What does your heart say? It was a simple question with a complicated answer, or maybe not. Maybe Margaret was overcomplicating something she already knew deep down. The next day, she requested separate meetings with Takeda and Richard. First, she met with the Japanese executive at a discreet hotel downtown. Mr. Takeda, she began after the initial courtesies, your offer is more than generous. It's what the Lily of 20 years ago would have accepted without hesitation. But you're not her anymore, Takeda understood. Not entirely, Margaret agreed. I'm Lily and I'm Margaret. I'm an engineer and a mother, a grandmother. I'm Japanese and I'm American, and I've realized I don't have to choose between these identities. Takeda studied her carefully. Are you refusing our offer? I'm proposing an alternative, Margaret said. I'll lead the project, but based here in the United States. I'd travel to Japan as needed, but my home would be New York City. Additionally, I'd like to implement the same talent development program here that I created at Thompson. The Japanese executive smiled slowly. You haven't changed, Lily. Always finding creative solutions to complex problems. I'll take your proposal to the board, but I believe it'll be accepted. What matters is having you with us. Later, Margaret met with Richard. He waited in his office, visibly tense. Have you made your decision? He asked as soon as she entered. I've made several decisions, Margaret replied, sitting down. First, I'll partially accept Takeda Corporation's offer. I'll lead the American project but continue living here. Richard couldn't hide his relief. Second, she continued, I want to expand our program. With Takeda's support, we can create something revolutionary. A partnership between the companies. That's brilliant, and he agreed. Third, Margaret took a deep breath. About what you told me. About your feelings. Richard leaned forward, hopeful. I feel something too, she admitted. I can't define it yet, but it's there. However, if we explore this, it has to be slow. I have a family, responsibilities, and I've just accepted a major executive role. I can't afford to... Falling in love? Richard finished softly. Losing focus, she corrected, but smiled. At least not completely. Richard walked around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. Margaret, I'd wait decades if I had to. What matters is knowing there's a possibility. She looked at this man who had changed so much, who had learned to see beyond appearances, who respected her as a professional and admired her as a woman. There is, she confirmed, but let's build this the right way. Slowly, carefully. Like a good engineer, he teased. Exactly, Margaret laughed. They sealed the agreement with a handshake that lasted longer than professionally appropriate, but shorter than either of them wanted. The following weeks were a whirlwind of transformation. Margaret officially stepped down from her cleaning role to take charge of the Thompson Takeda Human Development Center. The media covered the story extensively, but now Margaret was ready to use the exposure to benefit the program. Her first move was hiring Mrs. Johnson as educational coordinator, Mr. Wilson as administrative manager, and Ashley as technology lead. Other employees who had shown hidden talents were gradually integrated into the program. This is reverse nepotism, Mrs. Johnson joked during a meeting. The cleaner promoting cleaners. It's justice, Margaret corrected. Capable people taking positions they deserve. The program expanded quickly. Within 6 months, it was serving 5 companies, identifying and developing talent at all hierarchical levels. Margaret traveled monthly to Japan, but kept her base in New York City, refusing to leave her modest apartment. You run a multi-million-dollar program and still live in Queens? Jennifer asked, amused. That's where my roots are, Margaret replied simply. Besides, how can I understand people's real needs if I isolate myself in a bubble of privilege? Her relationship with Richard progressed slowly, as promised. Occasional dinners, park walks with the kids, long work conversations that inevitably turned personal. Jennifer watched it all with a knowing smile. "Mom, you know you're dating, right?" she remarked after a particularly pleasant Sunday lunch where Richard had joined them. "We're not dating," Margaret protested. "We're getting to know each other better." "For a year now," Jennifer laughed. "I think you know each other well enough." It was true. The initial caution had given way to a deep connection built on mutual respect, shared values, and yes, attraction. Yes, but Margaret still hesitated to take the next step. It was Amy who, with the innocent wisdom of children, sparked the change. "Grandma," she said one night as Margaret tucked her in, "do you love Uncle Richard?" Margaret stopped, adjusting the blanket, surprised by the direct question. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because you smile differently when he's around," the girl observed. "The same smile as when you look at our baby pictures." The comparison caught Margaret off guard. Maternal love and romantic love were different, but there was truth in her granddaughter's observation. Both involved vulnerability, surrender, the willingness to put another's happiness on par with your own. "It's complicated, Amy. Adults always say that." The girl sighed dramatically. "But love is love, isn't it?" "Indeed. Why complicate what could be simple?" The next day, Margaret took the initiative. She called Richard and invited him to dinner. Not a work dinner, not a family dinner. A proper, romantic, official dinner for two. "Are you asking me out on a date?" he asked, surprise and joy clear in his voice. "I am," Margaret confirmed, feeling strangely like a teenager at 53. "Unless you'd prefer to keep getting to know each other for another decade." "I accept," he laughed. "Where and when?" "Leave it to me," said Margaret. "Just keep Saturday evening free." She chose a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, far from the corporate spotlight. She dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual. Jennifer helped with her hair and makeup, the two giggling like teenagers getting ready for prom. "Mum, you look beautiful," said Jennifer, admiring the result. "Richard is a lucky man." "We're both lucky," Margaret corrected. "Finding someone special at this stage in life, thus it's a gift." The dinner was perfect in its simplicity. They talked about everything and nothing, laughed over work stories, shared childhood memories. Without the pressure of corporate or family settings, they could simply be Richard and Margaret, two people discovering the joy of each other's company. "You know," Richard said during dessert, "I never thought I'd fall in love again. After the divorce, I focused so much on work that I forgot there was life beyond it. And I never thought I'd have a first time," Margaret confessed. "At 18, I went to Japan. Then it was work, motherhood, kids. There was never room for this." "This?" he teased gently. "Romance," she said, blushing slightly. "Passion. Love we choose, not born from obligation or circumstance." Richard reached across the table, intertwining their fingers. "Margaret Wong, Lily Wong, a woman of many names and talents. I love you. Every version of you. The brilliant engineer, the devoted mother, the caring grandmother, even the meticulous cleaner. I love your strength, your integrity, your ability to see the best in people." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. How many times had she dreamed of hearing such words? How many times had she convinced herself it was too late, that this part of life had passed? "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easier than she'd imagined. "I love the man who allowed himself to change, who learned to look beyond appearances, who gave me a chance when others saw just a cleaner." They stayed there, hands clasped, two mature adults rediscovering that the heart has no age limit for love. The path ahead wasn't without challenges. There were adjustments, negotiations, moments of doubt. Merging two fully formed lives, each with its own history and responsibilities, required patience and understanding. The kids embraced Richard completely, especially after he proved himself not just fun, but reliable in tough times. When Nathan broke his arm playing soccer, Richard was there. When Amy won the school essay contest, he was front row cheering. Jennifer, initially protective, gradually accepted Richard as family. The turning point came when she lost her job due to company cuts. Richard didn't just offer emotional support. He used his connections to help her find a better position, never letting it feel like charity. "Family helps family," he said simply when she tried to thank him. "And now, we're family." The development program kept growing, becoming a national model. Margaret was invited to speak at conferences, consult internationally, but she stayed grounded, literally, still visiting each participating company personally, talking to employees at every level. 2 years after that fateful phone call in Japanese, Margaret was in a place she'd never imagined. Executive director of a groundbreaking program, international consultant, sought-after speaker. But more importantly, she was loved and respected for who she was, not in spite of it. On a Saturday morning, as she prepared breakfast for their now expanded family, Richard had sold his bachelor apartment and moved into a larger house where everyone fit comfortably. Margaret reflected on their journey. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, hugging her from behind. "How life takes unexpected turns," she replied, leaning into him. "3 years ago, I was cleaning your office. Now you clean our kitchen," he teased, earning a light swat on the arm. "Now I'm happy," she finished, completely, unexpectedly happy. The children came running downstairs, Jennifer close behind, trying to impose some order. The table filled with chatter, laughter, and weekend plans. An imperfect family, formed by choice and love, not obligation. The phone rang, and Margaret answered absently. It was Takeda calling from Japan. "Lily, we have an interesting proposal. The Japanese government wants to implement our program nationwide. We'll need you here for 3 months to set everything up." Margaret looked at her gathered family. Nathan was showing Richard his new science project. Amy was helping Jennifer pour the juice. Everyone perfectly at ease, perfectly at home. "Can I bring my family?" she asked. "Of course. It would be an honor to host them." Margaret covered the receiver, glancing at everyone. "How about a working vacation in Japan?" The children's enthusiastic response, Jennifer's supportive smile, and the pride in Richard's eyes said it all. "I accept, Mr. Takeda, but now there are 5 of us." After hanging up, Richard kissed her softly. 5? You, me, Jennifer, Nathan, and Amy. A family. The best family, he agreed. And so Margaret Wong, who had hidden her light for so long, shone not just professionally but personally. The cleaning woman who spoke Japanese had become so much more. A leader, an innovator, a mother, a grandmother, and now a partner. But deep down she was still the same woman who had answered the phone on that fateful morning. Someone who saw value where others saw only function. Someone who understood that we all carry extraordinary stories, waiting only for the chance to be told. The program she'd created had already transformed thousands of lives, uncovering hidden talents, creating opportunities, breaking barriers. But perhaps her greatest achievement was personal, proving it's never too late to start over, never too late to love, never too late to be who we truly are. At that noisy, chaotic breakfast table, surrounded by those she loved and who loved her in return, Margaret finally understood. Success isn't measured in titles or salaries, but in human connections, in lives touched, in shared love. She had cleaned offices for years, but in the end it was her own life that needed the deepest cleaning, stripping away layers of fear, wounded pride, and resignation to reveal the extraordinary woman who had always been there, waiting only for the chance to shine. And shine she did. Not as a solitary star, but as a sun that warms and illuminates everyone around her, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting only for someone with the eyes to see and the courage to believe. The end. What did you think of Margaret's story? Have you ever witnessed hidden talents in your workplace? Share your experiences in the comments. If this journey of overcoming moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.